Good morning, Unser family and friends. My sincere condolences to all of you. As you gather to pay your final respects to Bobby, I'm thankful that Lisa asked me to say a few words in celebration of his life. Sure, there are some things that frustrated me about him, but those are also some of the things that I will miss the most. Let me read just a few. I'll miss his laughter, which was truly contagious, his straightforward opinions, his strength and his grit. He was colorful and he had no filter, for sure. Whenever Bobby addressed me, he'd always say, "Hey, Wop." And that was okay with me. Actually, I don't even think he ever knew my name. One thing that always impressed me from the very beginning is how kind and how accommodating he always was with his fans. He could strike up a conversation with anyone and put that person at ease, making that person a fan for life. Bobby Unser was a genuine character and one hell of a driver. That's how I will remember him. Thanks for the battles wheel to wheel. Thanks for the laughs. Above all, thanks for the friendship. Rest in peace, Racer.
The second tribute comes from the winningest car owner in the history of the Indianapolis 500 and the owner of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, Roger Penske.
I was honored when Lisa Unser asked me to say a few words today about Bobby. Before I do, I want to acknowledge Lisa, who was the real crew chief in the Unser family for the last 24 years. All the Bobby Unser fans and friends share our prayers and sympathies with you, Lisa, and your family. I got to know Bobby well over the years, and he was one of the greatest drivers that ever raced for our team. He was a true champion of our sport and a good friend. I'm sorry that I'm not able to join you today, but I thought it was appropriate to honor Bobby, where he experienced some of his greatest victories, including 3 wins in the Indianapolis 500 and a place that he truly loved here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, where he first raced in 1963. To help reflect on Bobby's legacy in Indianapolis, I'm joined by the 1968 Eagle Offie, the car used in the first Indy 500 victory, along with the famous Borg-Warner trophy that represents his legacy of 3 victories at the Brickyard. Not only was Bobby a great driver and a fierce competitor on the track, he also considered himself a pretty good engineer, and he liked to tell us that he was the one that actually first tested ground effects on Indy cars in the 70s, and in fact, he did his initial testing and development under high security in his warehouse there in Albuquerque with a pretty advanced system for the time. He used a miniature wind tunnel with a hairdryer to create airflow. Bobby was always very creative. Behind his magic with the hairdryer, Bobby certainly was key in helping us develop the ground effects on our Indy cars. His focus really helped us push the limits to get the most performance during a time when technology and design were evolving at a rapid pace. Of course, Bobby could also over-engineer a car. And I remember a race in Atlanta when he basically cooked the rear end of our car after he had his mechanics secretly switched to AMSOIL. That move didn't go over too well with our sponsor, Sun Oil, as you can imagine. But certainly, he did help fuel the success of our team as he won 11 races and 15 pole positions over 3 seasons. His biggest victory came in 1981 at the Indianapolis 500 when he started from the pole and led 89 laps for his third victory at Indy. That win came with controversy as the race officials did not like how Bobby blended into traffic coming off pit lane late in the race. After they announced the penalty on Bobby, Mara Andretti was named the winner of the race that year. It took a few months, but Bobby was reinstated as the winner, as the appeal panel said they could not call a moving violation after the race. This cemented his legacy as one of the greatest competitors in the history of the Speedway as a three-time Indy 500 champion. Beyond his obvious success on the track, Bobby was one of a kind, from his practical jokes to his colorful storytelling and the way he connected with people. Bobby was just a fun guy to be around. He loved playing tricks on our team members, acting like he was taking a nap while flying some of our team guys back home in his private plane, or getting an unsuspecting teammate to test their lung capacity by blowing into a special machine that actually decorated their face with carbon dust. It was almost a badge of honor to be pranked by Bobby Unser. His larger-than-life personality helped Bobby make such a smooth transition from racing to the broadcast booth, working with Paul Page and Sam Posey. Fans loved seeing Bobby on ABC's race broadcast as he shared his racing knowledge and his opinions on the sport. Bobby certainly had his share of opinions, and he loved communicating to a whole new audience and mixing it up with Sam on the broadcast as well. Over the last several years, the motorhome where I spent a good deal of my time during the month of May was parked near Bobby's. What I learned and observed about Bobby over those years was his genuine love for the fans. His passion for racing and winning was likely only surpassed by the love of our sport, and especially the Indianapolis 500. Bobby became a fixture at the Speedway each May, not because he was paid to be there, he wasn't. Bobby was there because he truly wanted to celebrate the greatest month in racing with the fans and make sure they enjoyed our sport and their time at Indy like he did. He would just sign every autograph request, speak to every group after group, telling his remarkable stories about racing, and remind everyone that in Bobby's unbiased opinion, the greatest driver ever to get behind a wheel of any race car was a guy named, guess what, Bobby Unser. As we look back on his incredible journey, there is so much that can be said about Bobby Unser. He was fast in anything he drove. He had a fierce desire to win. He had a love for life and all that he did. He was a three-time Indy 500 champion and a true racing legend. His passion, his enthusiasm, and his personality made him one of the most unique characters in racing history and one of the greatest ambassadors our sport has ever seen. But to me, Bobby Unser was a great friend, a champion at making all of us laugh, smile, and enjoy all that life has to offer. He will be missed, but never forgotten. Thank you, Bobby, and Godspeed.
Bobby Unser is my friend. I was honored to work and play with a man, by his own admission, the smartest man alive and the fastest man on earth. He used that fastest man on earth as a pickup line at the White Front or the Holiday Inn Northwest. I never understood why fastest man alive really worked for him, but it did. He won his first championship when he was 15 years old, and series and championships thereafter. He was devilish in a sprint car, champ car, Indy car, Formula One car. In fact, he even raced on ice. He was good at all of it. Winning was all that Bobby thought about. In 1955, he won the first of 13 Pikes Peak hill climbs. Bobby was tough and hardened in the crucible of racing. Racing was dangerous and deadly. 1963, I was attending my third Indianapolis 500-mile race, and I was looking somebody to root for. It was the powerful Novi was there at the time, and it needed somebody to tame that awesome power of that V8 automobile. Well, Parnelli Jones liked him, said, let's give that kid a shot. You could hear the Novi as a distinct, different song when it came by and all of the Offies went by. First lap, here he comes. I can hear that sound. And the second lap, he came by and drove right up into the first turn wall. I didn't have anybody to root for anymore. He did get better at racing. His first Indy win came on the course at Mosport, Canada. In '68, he scored his first Indy 500 win. Paul Newman starred in the film that Roger mentioned. It honored that race and Bobby. But Bobby thought he was a lot prettier than Paul was. Said it many times. Bobby went on to win Indy in 3 different decades. In '72, he took the pole, jumping the track record 17.1 miles an hour. Or as Bobby put it, almost 18 miles an hour. Now, part of that jump came from the aerodynamics. Bobby and Dan Gurney invented the gurney flap on the rear wing of the car, and it worked. By the way, do not ever call that a wicker bill. He won the California 500 4 times. 9 times he sat on the Indy 500 front row. Bobby was a champion's champion. He won in '81 after that small disagreement and walked away from the race after that win. He was the 5th 3-time winner of the Indianapolis 500. He was also, by the way, a doctor. After an exciting night at, again, the White Front, Holiday Inn Northwest, and other whereabouts, he would come into the track hospital first thing in the morning, and he would demand and prescribe for himself a shot of vitamin B12 and some oxygen and some IV normal saline to get him back. So in the afternoon, he was ready to run those 200 miles an hour laps that he was famous for in those days. Then Bobby had that contest. He came to me, and I was working at a local TV station, and we sat up in a dark conference room night after night looking at videos of that race, trying to find something that would help Bobby. And one night, very late, he said, Paul, and he looked me right in the eye. He said, Paul, I didn't know that was wrong. If I'd known it, I never would have done it. Well, it eventually worked out for him. Bobby went on then to be a television announcer. My lucky day. First on NBC with the kart series, then the Indy 500 on ABC. Along with Sam, the intellectual, and the smartest man alive, I had fun as a job being in between those two. Sam, you are totally wrong. I can't tell you how many times we heard that. And then Bobby'd start talking, and he'd explain, and he'd work his way around so that by the end, he said exactly what Sam had said, but now Bobby had said it, therefore it is right. Our first live race was at Phoenix, Arizona, and I couldn't believe it. We got on the air, he did his little, kind of stuttered through his on-camera open. We got in the booth, and this guy that Parnelli Jones called a preacher because he talked so much, stopped talking. Bobby. So the only thing I can think of to do is I start asking him questions to, get him in the flow of things and all that. And at one point, we had an onboard camera up over the right shoulder of the driver. And there was a tube running from the helmet back beyond the camera. And I said to get him talking, Bobby, what is that tube running to the helmet? Bobby said, Paul, that's his emergency oxygen supply. It wasn't. This guy won 13 Pikes Peak hill climbs. At Long Beach, California once, we broadcast off a 75-foot scissors lift. I got it up 10 feet. Whoa, that's good, Paul. Well, I got up 20 feet. No, Father, we're good. 75 feet. And then, of course, I had a little of this. And it's like, Father, stop that. 13-time Pikes Peak champion was afraid of heights. Figure that one out. Of course, he was big with the snowmobiles, and one time got lost out in the wilderness. And we found him after 2 days, of course, in a warm shack with a telephone, but he got a $75 fine for that. Well, Bobby didn't like that, so he went to court. He went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States to get rid of that $75 fine. He lost that one, by the way. He was also an entrepreneur. He sold at one time, along with a company in Indianapolis, a thing to defeat police radar. And what it was a small box that emitted the same frequency as the police radar frequencies. And so you just put it in there and you turn it on, and the police never see you because they're getting this interference coming to them. The only problem that he had not thought out in this device was that when I turned it on in my car, that set off the radar alarms in every car in front of me for a mile or so. So everybody else slowed down, so I couldn't speed because they were slowed down. But he was a master at that kind of thing. Paul Tracy was on the podium at a race in Vancouver, Canada once, and Bobby called him a great American driver. Well, I needed to fix that one, so I said, of course, Bobby, we all know that Paul is a Canadian. And Bobby came right back. Well, Paul, we all know that Americans, and Bobby wants to be an American, and Canadians want to be an American. Okay, another great moment in the history of television. In fact, Bobby and the crew won 2 sports Emmys for the best special back-to-back. Bobby is the only TV announcer that I know to ever have the director who talked to him on that little curlicue in his ear. This director at one point in the race at Denver said, Bobby, have you had some sort of lobotomy since our production meeting? Apparently Bobby wasn't following the script, which shouldn't have been news to that. He was also an expert in television, technically. One year in the booth at the Indianapolis 500, when we had the old CRT big screen televisions, they were huge. You know, we couldn't even see the straightaway from the booth, but nobody cared, except us. And Bobby was adjusting his, a little more hue, a little more tint. Oh, God. And finally, this television expert got that thing totally out of whack. You couldn't see anything on it. So he lowered his stool down and kind of slid in right next to me over here. I didn't know he was there. And he started into one of those things where he was going to say something that shouldn't have been said at that point of the race because we're going to do a whole feature on it later in the race. And I realized what he was doing. I had to get him stopped. So I swung around. Bobby. Hit him right in the face with my ring. He just kind of looked like a little puppy that I just hit. Well, he loved practical jokes, that's for sure. One time we were racing snowmobiles, or leading a tour actually in snowmobiles, up at Eagle River, Wisconsin, and that trail crosses a number of lakes. And every time we'd get on a lake, Bobby would kind of edge me over and over and over. I was following him right behind him, and there were these little mounds of snow, and we'd get over by them and kick up the snow and everything. And so when I got to the end of that lake run, pulled up, and we're waiting for the rest of the people to come in, I said, Bobby, what were those little mounds of snow that we were passing all the time? Oh, Paul, those are blocks of ice the ice fishermen took out and set there. Great practical joke, Bob. I could have been like all over that lake, pieces of the skidoo everywhere. That was Bobby. You don't find many like Bobby. He was always terrific with his fans. He loved his fans. He was a wonderful ambassador to our sport. He was driven to win, to be the best. There were no pretensions about Bobby. He just was who he was. He lived the life that he wanted, and we are all richer for it. my sympathy, family and friends, and goodbye, my friend. Now let me introduce Carlos Garcia, a local businessman and close friend of the family.
Good morning. My name is Carlos Garcia. I'm a friend of Bobby and Lisa's, and I'm honored to speak in front of you all today. When you grow up in Albuquerque, especially during the era that my siblings and I did, the Unsers are your heroes, plain and simple. I only knew Bobby later in his life, which I think was a benefit. Bobby had calmed down a lot and had become very reflective in his later years. Bobby always made time for me and many others. When you talked to Bobby, he made you feel like there was nothing in the world he would rather be doing. As we've seen from the thousands of social media posts and photos shared over the last week, he made time for everyone. Bobby cared about the fans as much as anyone out there, especially if there was a camera involved. Like many of you, when I met the Unsers, I swore that I would never ask Bobby, Al Sr., or Al Jr. who was the best. Well, I have to admit, I made that mistake 3 times. But I'll never forget what Bobby's answer was when I asked him. We were sitting in his garage talking about everything under the sun and having a couple of brown waters. I said, "Okay, Uncle Bobby, who was the best to ever do it?" "Well, that's a tough question," he said. He looked at me and said, "Let me tell you about Parnelli Jones. I never saw anyone so technically gifted as Parnelli, and he taught me everything I know. He believed in me and gave me my first shot, my first big break, and I never would have gotten where I ended up if it hadn't been for Parnelli, and boy, could he drive a car." Then he said, "And then there was Mario Andretti. If he was driving, I knew I was in for a long afternoon." Then Bobby went off on one of his tangents and told me how close he and Mario had been for so many years and how much he really valued their friendship. He then told me the well-documented story about when he and Mario went to Italy to race a Formula One race, which is a classic if you've never heard it. Bobby got emotional when he told me that at one point he hadn't talked to Mario in many years, and Bobby went into the hospital. He said the first phone call he got was from Mario Andretti, and he would never forget that. He told me if Mario had a good car, he was just about impossible to beat. Bobby then went on to say, "You know my nephew Al?" I said, "I know him a little bit." Then Bobby motioned me closer and said, "When little Al was at his best, he was the best in the world, the best on the planet. He could drive any car on any track and whip everyone. I never saw anything like it, and everybody wanted him to drive for them." Then Bobby looked me in the eye and said, "But I'm going to tell you, there was nobody better than my brother Al. I know he's my brother, but he was truly the best. He was so patient and calm and would let everyone else make their mistakes, and then he would make his move. If I had even a tiny bit of his patience, I would have won a lot more races and blown up a lot fewer engines." Bobby easily could have said that he was the best, which is what I expected him to say, but he didn't. At this point in his life, he gave credit to others who had been important to him and who he thought were really great, and I think that said a lot about him. Bobby was a meticulous person. He prided himself on all of his things being perfectly organized, clean, and in the perfect spot. If you've ever been to his house or seen his garages, you know what I mean. Everyone jokes about him still having cases of motor oil from sponsors in the 1960s. While that is true, that oil looks pretty darn cool on the shelves from Jerry Unser Motor Company or stacked next to his original toolboxes and workbenches. Bobby's hair and clothes or racing suits were perfect in every photo, even going back to his childhood. Bobby took so much pride in everything he did, even getting dressed in the morning. Bobby was a famous storyteller. His stories were so fascinating you hung on every word. His inflection, gestures, and excitement brought his tales of another era to life. Bobby made you feel like you were there when he told a story. In the car, in the pit, at the bar, on his airplane, in his dad Jerry's garage. It was better than a movie. What I loved most was his ability to recount every single detail and every person's name who was involved in a story. His recall was unmatched, and the things that he saw and experienced will live on through all of us in the retelling of all the fantastic Bobby Unser stories. Bobby valued nothing more in this world than his relationships. When Bobby would tell a story, he would give a vivid description of his accomplice, and he would say he was a really good friend, or we became really good friends. Bobby fostered friendships with so many folks over so many years. As difficult as he was, he had many true friends. Bobby's unconditional loyalty was never questioned. If you needed anything, Bobby was there. When Albuquerque was under siege in the 1970s with rioters going through downtown, Bobby got a call from his good friend Lucky Boyd, fearing the Hilton Hotel, where Boyd was the manager, was going to get attacked. Bobby was there in an instant, rifle in hand, with his brother Al to protect Lucky's hotel. That's just the kind of guy he was. Bobby loved talking about the people he served with in the Air Force, the car owners, race teams, folks from Goodyear, folks from the Speedway, and so many sponsors that he worked with over the years that became good friends. Bobby relished telling stories about so many of his friends, but Mario Andretti, Paul Page, Robin Miller, Armin Carrion, Bob Scott, Steve Shunk, Roger Penske, Ron Dawes, Jim Rice, Dan Gurney, and Parnelli Jones seem to come up a little bit more often. Bobby Unser was so much more than a race driver. He had multiple careers that he handled with aplomb. Bobby was a fantastic TV announcer, even winning an Emmy for his commentary. Bobby put so much time and effort into researching everything he did, and it was apparent in his work and the quality of his work. Bobby particularly enjoyed his time as an expert witness in car crash cases where he got to testify on behalf of insurance companies and automobile manufacturers. Bobby loved being the star witness. Many New Mexicans will undoubtedly say that Bobby Unser's first Indy 500 win and Al Unser's fourth Indy 500 win are two of our greatest sports moments in history. Al's win in 1987 had it all. Al winning the race, Bobby on the call, predicting every little thing that was going to happen and being right, nailing every bit of strategy, and then Al Jr. pulling up next to his dad and Bobby tearing up in the booth over yet another great Unser family accomplishment. My brother, and that voice was just incredible. No one had a voice like Uncle Bobby, totally unmistakable. My brother Ed equated Bobby's voice to that of Keith Jackson. When you heard Keith Jackson's voice on TV, you knew USC was playing football or the Rose Bowl was on. When you heard Bobby Unser's voice, you knew it was race day or a great story was coming. Bobby Unser sure loved being Bobby Unser. He would love getting to the point of a story where he was in a sticky situation and I could interject with, "Yeah, but you're Bobby Unser." And he could say, "You're darn right, and let me tell you how this one ended." The only thing Bobby loved more than being Bobby Unser was being an Unser. Bobby was so proud of his family's history and their racing history in particular. Bobby prided himself on his archive of Unser photos, memorabilia, and most of all, its oral history. The family's humble beginnings at Jerry and Mary Unser's home on the Southwest Mesa along Route 66 in Albuquerque ended up being the greatest family legacy in the history of racing. Bobby relished his time growing up with his brothers Jerry, Louie, and Al, shooting rabbits and playing baseball on the Mesa, running with their gang at Atrisco Elementary and Albuquerque High, and most importantly in the garage or on the racetrack with his brothers. Bobby would light up when talking about Jerry, Louie, or Al. Each one of them held a special place in his heart, and the legacy of his parents and brothers was very important to him. Bobby reveled in the success of his brothers, noting the special gifts that each of them had, especially Al. As competitive as Bobby was, the simultaneous rise to stardom with Al made him proud. When Bobby won, he was in the spotlight, and when Al won, he could talk about the Unser brothers dominating. Bobby won either way. Bobby took a lot of pride in the fact that he was from Albuquerque, and he would bring up his beloved city in interviews no matter where he was. Bobby always wanted the entire world to know that the Unser clan hailed from Albuquerque, and this was home. Bobby and his family made Albuquerque so proud and continue to do so. You can be anywhere in the country, and when you tell someone you're from Albuquerque, the answer most times is, "I love the Unsers." Bobby will always be an icon of our city, and will always be remembered of Bobby's roots here and what he became. Bobby's successes at Pikes Peak and Indianapolis is how the world will remember him, but those of us from Albuquerque will remember him for so much more. As friends and family, we all owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Lisa for the level of care that she gave Bobby over the years, especially this last stretch of his life. Saying Bobby was not an ideal patient would be a major understatement. Lisa ran a full-blown care center and treated Bobby with so much kindness and love, even when he was being extra difficult. Lisa was always optimistic about how Bobby was going to rebound from the latest setback and she arranged the best therapists to help him keep him in the best shape possible. No one ever thinks of the caregiver in these situations because the loss itself is overwhelming. Lisa gave 100% of her energy to taking care of Bobby and making him as comfortable as possible. Her undivided attention allowed Bobby to carry on with dignity, and I think I speak for all of us when I express a sincere thank you to Lisa Unser. I was listening to the radio the other day, and the radio host was talking about some very opinionated comments that the basketball player Charles Barkley had made. The host got into a debate with the guest, and he said, well, that's just Charles Barkley being Charles Barkley. I thought to myself, well, the origin of that saying, that's just Bobby Unser being Unser. The origin of that saying had to be, that's just Bobby Unser being Bobby Unser. He was an original, and there'll never be another one like him again. He always shot you straight, told you what was on his mind and how he saw things, something we're truly lacking in the world today. Bobby lived his life on his terms and did things his way. On the track, off the track, and in our memories, Bobby Unser is the true definition of a legend, and he certainly ran a full race.
King Solomon said in Proverb 22:29, "Do you see a man skilled in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men." And that is the kind of life that we gather here to honor today. We gather to celebrate, but we also gather to console. As I spoke to his son Bobby Jr. last night, asking him to simply share his heart with me as to what he's thinking and feeling now, he said with a broken voice, "It's hard, it's tough, it hurts." And that sentiment is reflected in many of you today. And so our hearts are with you, and again, family and those closest to Bobby, we seek to be conduits of comfort for you as well. We celebrate. As was mentioned, I believe God gives us champions so that we can look at how they approach life, have them inspire us, and be examples for us. And here we come to one of his most famous sayings, that of Bobby Unser, who said, "Success is where preparation and opportunity meet." While at the wheel of life, and nobody knows this better than his family, he took his family and his friends for quite a ride. As has been referenced, you might describe his life as controlled chaos. As I learn and read and hear of him, it's a life that had the foot all the way down to the bottom of the pedals capacity from start to finish. Like life, and like those who accomplish much in life, Scripture likens such to an oxen. In Proverbs 14:4, as I learned more and more of his life this past week, this verse came to my mind as I thought of him. "Where no oxen are, the trough is clean, but much increase comes by the strength of an ox." And you just think of an ox in the trough and how dirty it is, how messy it is. And yet, you know that that's an indication that there's a lot being accomplished, a lot being done. And his life, perhaps also similar to that of a race car, was that sometimes it was running perfectly, everything nicely tuned. At other times, it was in the shop, needing repair, broken, only because it was being used, maximized. There were even its occasional crashes, right? As we celebrate him, let's take a moment to think of just some of the many, many ways in which he can be described, the first thing that came to my mind as a native Albuquerquean in particular is that of family man. His daughter Cindy will share this story much better than I can, and I hope that I don't injure it too much. But she tells of a story back when she was 9 years old at the racetrack with her dad, having a great time. And it was realized before the race started that there wasn't a trophy girl present to present the trophy after the race. And so Bobby Unser nominated Cindy to be the trophy girl that day. And while that was an honor, she became terrified. When asked why, she said she didn't want to kiss a strange man. Having to hand over that trophy at the end of the race, her dad's solution was simply this: don't worry, sweetheart, I'll win it. You won't be kissing a stranger, you'll be kissing Daddy. Sure enough, he won the race. What a storybook postcard that encapsulated so much of his life from start to finish. Again, as one who's a native of this city, when I think of the name Unser, the word that immediately follows is family. The Unser family is legendary, not only in racing circles and throughout the world, but in this very dear hometown of theirs. In fact, I want to take this opportunity to echo the sentiments of all who are of Albuquerque, to thank all of you in the Unser family for your sacrifices. Thank you for your commitments. And I speak not only to those who were in the winner's circle physically, but all of you. I speak to the wives. I speak to the sons and daughters and family. You had to do without a lot throughout life so that your family could achieve what they did. There were certain things that you lived without that other families of less notoriety didn't have to live without, but you made sacrifices. You share in all of those victories. You share in the inspiration that your family provides many of us today. And so again, on behalf of all who've been inspired, we thank you for all that you've sacrificed, all that you've lived without, and for those times where the trough had to be messy, those times where there were crashes in life, those times where lives, relationships needed repair, for all the sacrifices made. We thank you. You all sacrificed a lot as a family to be champions and to be inspiring. Not only was he a family man, but he was a student of life, of racing, of all of his interests. I love the fact that Lisa and Cindy shared that if she was outside mowing the lawn and there was some smoke coming out of the engine, they would do their best to make sure he didn't see it, because he'd want to see it and go fix it, go repair it. She even talks about him souping up the lawnmower, that it wasn't good enough coming straight from the factory, but that he always wanted to improve things. He was a student. He was a fanatic, as we have already commented on. Always believing that more is better. 17 point something over wasn't good enough. It was almost 18. In fact, and if I could uniquely turn my attention to the family once again, to thank you for all that you've sacrificed, all that you endured in order for the life of a champion to grace our presence. I think of what was well said about perfectionists. It was said of perfectionists that they're those who take great pains and give them to everybody else in their life. Always wanting more. More is better. In fact, he said, quote, desire. That's the one secret of every man's career. Not education, not being born with hidden talents. Desire. If a person has enough desire, he will acquire the talent. He will build his skills. That is inspiring, and his life backed it up. He's also known as a fierce competitor, or as his competitor said, one to be reckoned with. A world champion, an Emmy Award winner. Johnny Rutherford, the great racer, said well of Bobby Unser, they broke the mold when they made Bobby Unser. So we honor and celebrate a man who lived a very full life, who seemingly maximized all 87 years while on this earth, spending that time, investing that time, always thinking, always moving, always doing, always innovating, always improving, always projecting, always planning his next move. And the lives of such men are truly inspiring. But they not only inspire us in their lives, but they also inspire us even now in their death. Because they bring us to days like this, to moments as these, that cause us to stop in our tracks, to inspect our own lives, considering how we will leave our marks on this earth. And that brings us to a consideration of comfort before we conclude our service today. Of the caution flag, Bobby Unser Sr. said, "Yellow usually means it's not that serious." When you learned of his death, even though it was anticipated, the red flag came out. That red flag causes us to stop in our tracks and to consider how we need to be comforted, how we need to be perhaps even granted some perspective to know how to live life now, especially as family, without him here on this side of heaven with you all. As we consider the comfort that's needed at this time, I think of the words of the great Parnelli Jones, who, and it was mentioned earlier as well, who said of those who knew him well that they considered him the preacher. Jones said, that man was into everything. He knows everything. And once he starts talking racing, Bobby's going to tell his stories first. This might be the only gathering in his honor that he's not going to be able to take the mic from any of us who are at the podium. But it sounds like if he were here, he'd be wanting to take the mic right now and share his version, his perspective with you all. He'd want this microphone, but I'm sure he'd want this microphone so that you all might be comforted. You might have heard the story of the little boy who was finding it hard to sleep at night. He called out from his room for his dad, like many children do, and when his father got there, the little guy said, "Daddy, the longer I'm in here, the darker and scarier it gets. Couldn't you stay just a little longer until I fall asleep?" "Oh, son," his dad said, "nothing bad can happen to you here. Your mom and I are right down the hall." To which the little boy quickly replied, "I know, Daddy, but I'm scared." His father says, "But you don't have any reason to be afraid. In fact, not only are mom and dad down the hall, but God himself is right here with you." The little boy says, "I know, Dad, I know, but I'd rather have someone with skin on him." Today, and in the days to come, you have that unique opportunity to be that for one another, to be the comfort of God with skin on it for one another. It's my encouragement to all of us, and uniquely the family, that we allow Bobby Sr.'s life to inspire us, to put away things that might have otherwise created distance between any of us, that we might bring comfort to one another in this time. It's my encouragement to all of the rest of the family and friends to make sure that you don't forget Lisa and the children and the grandchildren in the weeks and months to come, but that you check in on them, offer some comfort with some skin on it. Bobby Unser's maker is the God of all comfort, who also said, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." And Jesus later asks those that he declared those words to, "Do you believe this?" And for those who believe, of those who know this comfort, I was reminded of a story by another great preacher, Donald Gray Barnhouse. Cancer had taken his wife when he was the father of 3 young children, all under the age of 12. And as they were driving to her service, all 4 of them in the car, Dad with the 3 children, it was quiet. He didn't know exactly what to say. The children weren't saying anything. But as they were driving, a very large truck passed them by, casting a noticeable shadow on the entire car. It was at that moment that he turned to his oldest daughter and said, "Tell me, sweetheart, would you rather be run over by that truck or by the truck's shadow?" Looking curiously at her dad, she quickly replied, "Well, by the shadow, I guess. Shadow can't hurt you." And then he turned his attention to all 3 of his children and he said, "Your mother's not been overridden by death, but by the shadow of death. There's nothing to fear." That brings to my mind a very memorable psalm that most of us are familiar with, Psalm 23, where in verse 4 we read, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Another great preacher, Charles Haddon Spurgeon, said of this, death as a shadow, quote, "Death in its substance has been removed by Christ, and only the shadow of it remains. Nobody's afraid of a shadow, for a shadow can't block a man's pathway for even a moment. The shadow of a dog can't bite. The shadow of a sword can't kill." We need to know the comfort that Christ offers to those who believe in him, that he has overcome death, that he is the God of all comfort. Christ himself took all the penalty of sin and death upon himself, conquering death. You might say entering the winner's circle over death in his resurrection. This should bring hope to all of us who believe. It brings us into the winner's circle, death having been conquered, knowing that Christ has removed the potency of death. All that remains is its shadow. Brings to my mind the words of another preacher, this one from Memphis, Adrian Rogers, who said, "God's promises are not mottos to be hanging on a wall, but they're checks to take to the bank." I like that phrase because it reminds me of how Bobby Unser lived his life. He probably wasn't that impressed with the museum quality car that wasn't in the museum because it didn't accomplish anything but just looked pretty. He'd rather have something that didn't look as great but was there in that museum because it accomplished something. Again, it brings to my mind Proverb 14, verse 4, "Where there are no oxen, the trough is clean, but much increase comes by the strength of an ox." Be comforted today. Be celebratory today. Consider that in his life, he inspired us. Consider also how in his death, Bobby Unser can continue to inspire us. Again, champions are given to us by God as examples. God also in Scripture gives us racing as a metaphor for how he wants us to approach life. As we consider this race of life that all of us are in, we have opportunity to consider how we might maximize the life that God has gifted us with. I close with a few passages from Scripture from the New Testament where God gives us this metaphor of racing for the sake of inspiration. The Apostle Paul wrote in Acts 20:24, talking of the difficulties of life. He says, "But none of these things move me, nor do I count my life dear to myself, so that I may finish my race with joy in the ministry which the Lord Jesus has given me to testify to the gospel of the grace of God." Pedal to the metal when it comes to fulfilling God's intention for our lives. The writer of Hebrews says in chapter 12, verse 1, "Therefore we also, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, those who've gone before us, those who are witnessing us now, those in the stands, you might say, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." Thank you, God, for the example of a champion that you've given us, that you've given me in Bobby Unser, and how he raced on this earth. And finally, the Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 7 and 8, he says these words at the close of his life, his last known writings before his graduation to heaven. Paul the Apostle says, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who've loved his appearing." When we think of those images of Bobby Unser in the winner's circle, be inspired that God has allowed us to be in the winner's circle over death by the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. But he also doesn't want to just prepare us to live right on this side of earth, but he wants to prepare us to die right on this side of heaven. This is where his life as an example of success being where preparation and opportunity meet. So we have the life as an example and the life as an inspiration. May we be better men and better women in life, fulfilling God's purposes for our lives by reflecting upon the life, the legacy of Bobby Unser.
Family and friends, on behalf of Calvary and the staff, they'd like to thank you for coming today and showing your support and love to the family. You all are invited to the interment at Sunset Memorial Park. We will be going in a formal funeral procession escorted by Albuquerque Police Department. We will be going east on Osuna, getting onto I-25. Then we will be taking the Comanche-Manal exit, taking a right onto Manal, and taking a left into the Manal Gate of Sunset Memorial Park. Please turn on your flashers and stay as close in the procession as you can to help APD keep everyone together. Thank you.